Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Pine Hills Palace in the Indian Hill Studios, just west of Orlando, Florida, a wet and dreary night. Something that makes me think of days gone by. And I have RDV and Professor Pixel as my guests tonight. We are going to be discussing one of their shows that they've been working on and debuting on the Extreme Movie Show, where they're doing a first-time reaction video. And one of the movies that they're going to be dropping later this week is the old 1942 Humphrey Bogart Lowen Bacall classic called Casablanca. Considered by a lot of people, guys, one of the greatest movies of all time. I've seen this movie many times. I don't want to give too much away with all the details about it. I just was going to share my opinion on why a lot of people think it is the greatest. But let's start with you, RDV, with Casablanca. What are your initial thoughts about this movie?
Like I said, I like Bogart. Bogart, whenever he delivers his lines, perfect. The rest of the cast, all right. Ingrid Bergman, she was cute. She was beautiful. But beyond that, her role was just kind of like, eh. But overall, it was an okay movie. I don't want to consider it to be the greatest. I mean, obviously we've had better movies other than that. But I do love the noir. So maybe at the time it was the greatest. But since then we've had better movies like Romancing the Stone.
Stop it! Stop. With a movie like this, I think it deserves the seriousness that we're giving it. You should give it. I will say that.
Here's the thing about Casablanca. It is the perfect mix. It has the right amount of romance, the right amount of comedy, and it has that serious vibe through it that you just sit back and you take it in. It's truly something spectacular. It's a movie I wish I had watched sooner.
Well, it's interesting you say that because you're the young one of this group. You are, without getting too specific here, a young 20-something, and the doctor is a buff mid-30s, and I'm maybe a year or two older than that. But you bring up an interesting thing talking about the obvious combination, or maybe not so obvious to people that haven't seen some or too familiar with it, about Casablanca, a movie that came out so many years ago. Again, 1942, so what, 78 years ago? It's got the backdrop of war. It's got lovers that missed each other, call it May December romance, if you will. You got her with the new guy. You've got this watering hole that the Nazis, commies in, because nobody liked a commie even back then, and all sorts of stuff too. But you've got the music, you've got the romantic stuff supposedly about it with the cynical words. I mean, RDV, you and I covered Bogart in a couple of films because that's something we've definitely enjoyed about it. What did you think about Bogart's performance in here, just in general, compared to the other films that we've talked about on Extreme Classics?
Like I said, I liked his portrayal in here as being Rick and stuff in here. He's like, one guy makes a comment. He's like, you sure you stick your neck out? He's like, I don't stick my neck out for anybody. It's like, or it gets really expensive. It's like I said, Humphrey Bogart pretty much sold this movie. We had I'm trying to forget what the other guy was in here. Yeah, it's like this. Yeah, Peter Lorre.
Peter Lorre. Yep.
Yeah, Lorre.
Yeah, I know. So it's funny. I've never seen that guy before in any movie, but I've always seen the portrayal of. I've seen him in Animaniacs making fun of him. So I've never So what I pictured as him, he'd be like like those little monkeys with the giant big eyes, like Eeyore, but totally different. Based on the voice. Right. He was, in the beginning, you see him coming there, he's like, help me, you got to hide me, sir. And he's like, I'm not going to do nothing. I just love his, how, like, Humphrey Bogart here is like, would be the typical normal-headed male. He's like, sorry, so she stood me up and she wants help? Oh, screw you. And I agree with them, and so, but you gotta help us, I did not know. He's like, eventually he caves, because he's a nice guy. And I didn't like the fact that she took advantage of it.
Well, that's an interesting detail about the movie, but something you said at the beginning, I think is absolutely crucial to kind of get into, and it's kind of coming back a little bit towards the whole movie. Now, on the Extreme Movie Show, we cover a couple different types of films. Obviously, action films in the 80s are staples, but we like to do the occasional more real defined sci-fi, but also one of the things you and I have done, RDV, is we've talked about extreme classics, and Bogart to me is like our foundation. We kind of go, are we going to do a Bogart film or something else for one of these extreme classics? So to me, I like the fact that when we saw Key Largo, we just did Dark Passage. Pixel joined us on that. To me, you can talk about Bogart, the role that he played and everything, but what I wanted to talk about was something even simpler before we get to the movie, and that's how we came about to watch this movie. And I'll go first. For me, as a kid growing up watching Saturday morning cartoons, you would see older cartoons that would be played like before movies and stuff. Is my understanding of it. There'd always be this like cartoon bogey character, and I'd see him all the damn time. And there'd always be a detective, and always be a guy holding like a martini or some sort of drink, and it was always this Bogart guy. There are films about Bogart by people that weren't Bogart but were Bogart impersonators in the 70s and 80s, and I didn't realize how big of an influence he had on movies. So for me, outside of Charlton Heston, who was alive at the time and still making movies that I was aware of, going back in time, one of the earliest guys I watched because my parents watched him, said lots of great things about him, was Humphrey Bogart. Not a big dude physically or anything, but the point you mentioned before, he sells the film. It's his charisma. It's his ability on screen to convince you of the role he's playing. And he's better when he plays, I think, kind of a cynical, jaded, by life type personality in any of his films, no matter what the angle of the film is. But for me, it was just, there was always the as time goes by and the piano and everybody. And I'll be honest, the first 2 times I saw the movie and I sat down and said, I think I kind of like it. And I like how they're dressed. I like how simple the film looks visually. I didn't get a lot of the backstory until rewatching it as I got older and knew more about history and stuff. So for you, RDV, does that make this harder than, like, say, Dark Passage or something else we've watched, or for you to enjoy, or what do you think of that?
Like I said, I still enjoyed the movie, but at the thing, yes, Eric says he loves the supporting cast, and he says I should be canceled because, I love Bogart. Bogart, he has that personality, he has that voice, distinctive when he talks, the way he talks.
Don't let Bergman fool you.
Yeah.
The entire time we were watching it, and our Friday night, it'll be released. The entire time he kept telling me to shut up so that he could pay attention.
Well,
there's a lot of dialogue packed in this movie. Two things.
That Pixel, you're just annoying, and second, that's what we call pill talk, baby. No. I did like the movie. I'm just saying, is it the greatest romance? No. I'll disagree with that.
Listen, I know that's a bold statement to make, and I even have trouble saying that because while I did love the movie, that's a bold thing to claim.
Yeah.
At the same time, I can't think of one in my mind that stands out better than this.
We had 7 Days and 7 Nights.
Stop it! Don't be a goof with that crap. Come on, bro. This is we're talking about.
I liked. I for being what it is. It's a noir generative. It's probably is the greatest for the noir films. That seriousness. But as far as being the greatest romance movie of all time, no.
Well, the reason why I bring that up, and as the title of tonight's episode is Casablanca, the greatest movie ever, is because, it was like we talked about before, a different time in the studios where you'd really tightly on a low budget, get your movie in and out, done, made, slapped together, boom, it's out there. You've got your leading stars. It was kind of canned and formulaic in the sense that, okay, we're going to have Bogart. We're going to give him a lot of screen time. He's going to have a love interest. It's going to look like this. We're going to have some fancy backdrop location or whatever. And so to me, obviously it checks all those boxes off, but the other thing about it too is that this movie didn't really come out of the gate the greatest movie ever. It's something that got legs later on, and I don't know how big Humphrey Bogart's death immortalized him in the fans, making him like his stuff even more. However, it's one of those films that I think when film critics that were considered in a little bit more high regard than anybody in media is today, because let's face it, the media is not held in any regard whatsoever, no matter where you stand on anything, politically, economically, culturally. I think this is one of those films that on a lot of lists that was in the 80s start getting more prevalent with reviews in newspapers, is that people just said, you know what, out of all the films that we can say is great, like Citizen Kane or this, it just kind of stayed and it lingered. And the romantic aspect too is, I think a lot of people automatically assume that romance means, a love attraction between, a man and a woman. Well, not necessarily. The romance is, harken back to, good old days kind of call back. And the whole thing here too is, and I think it's so hard in such a connected world today to appreciate the fact that, as goofy as it sounds, RDB, I can't stress this enough, it's become even more apparent as I've gotten older that it's quite plausible at the time that when Rick and Elsa were, I guess, gonna meet, and he feels like he stood her up at the train station or whatever, that it's quite possible they could have literally just missed each other and therefore went about their lives, whatever. Him with, a broken heart, her going, only find myself in the arms of another man. And, this is the man that shows up with her, with him, and kind of gets them all pissed off and furious. So it's not like she's, being a complete jerk about it or like that. It seems like it's completely realistic. And I think she gives an innocent enough performance where you don't feel like she's just plotting and scheming. And that's what makes this so, then that sounds so horrible, I'm going to say, so terribly delicious, because you're like, damn it, I want to hate her because of what happened to him, because I like him so much. But you go, she's good enough at the position in acting that you're like, and the way they mention the story, like, and then they talk about, we'll always have Paris and this and that. And like you said, he rises to a higher level with the way the movie ends with a few lines. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty damn good stuff. So, yeah, it's not hot and heavy, we're going to have sex on screen, because that's not what they did back then in movies. They would only allude to it. But, yeah, the greatest romance, I'm not going to disagree with you. I don't think it's the greatest romantic movie. I don't think it's the greatest war movie. But the greatest movie overall, I don't know. It's up there.
Well,
it's definitely up there, because it's like I said, it has a mix of everything. We have that deep, heartfelt farewell at the end, but after that, when they kill the German major, when he kills him, but
now when I say it's Nord, it's like Nord. It has the typical characteristic.
Black and white, aren't you?
No. It has a lone hero with a deep sense of justice. It has a beautiful woman who's in trouble. It has a crook that laid hands on something that very valuable both the protagonist and the antagonist need. The inspector that serves both as an ally and a foil to the main character. So I mean, you got the antagonist who's in a position of great power. It's like I said, it has a whole noir feel to it. You can't technically claim it as a noir, but it has the same noir-esque characteristics.
Would you mind if I sent Eric Breen a link?
He's just gonna yell at me. I don't know.
I'm willing to let him yell at you. So
I did. I wasn't looking at the messages. Did Eric wanted to pop in?
He said, "How can I jump on with no link?"
If he jumps on, who's gonna be watching? Just Ed?
He can leave it up.
That's what she said.
I'll hook you up here. No, but as far as the movie goes, I mean, you're talking about obviously a guy that's got great screen presence today. You don't look at him and go, oh, he's no good, right? So you've got a lot of good acting in it, and you've got a great supporting cast. And it'll be interesting to hear what Eric has to say about it. So Eric, I'm going to let them ramble for a minute while I pull you backstage here. So Pixel, ramble out something with the movie that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. Rambling. I don't want to just. Well, yes, I will. I will shamelessly plug.
Yeah.
When we post it Friday, I highly recommend that you do watch it. It starts out with a guest spot from England team. And he's basically telling us, you kids have a good time. And after we start it, you can just tell how entranced we can get. And we feel bad about it. But if you run it at the same time as we do, and you've never seen it before, you'll understand. And now we have Mr. Breen here.
Welcome, Eric. I know you're a big fan of some of these old classic movies. I think bigger picture, talking about Casablanca tonight, the whole idea of it here, just talking about it briefly, because we typically don't do these types of streams, is just basically that you guys are starting to do some shows on your own that we're starting to put up here on the Extreme Movie Show. But one bedrock that you guys do is like a first reaction, and it happens to be a classic movie, which, I didn't want to say, oh, it's the greatest movie, it's the worst. It's like, okay, what'd you guys think? Hell, you're very young, and, hard to be. He's not young, he's not old, so it makes me and Eric be the old men in this group here too. So it's interesting for us to hear what young people today, and especially in the way the world is, think about a movie that's considered a classic, because some people might go, oh, it's so archaic. Why would people think it's even good now? It sucks by today's standards. So let me welcome Eric. Eric, testing 1, 2, 3. You there, bro?
I am here.
Casablanca. Initial thoughts, sir. Give it to me.
Okay, as far as whether or not it's the best movie of all time, I won't go that far. But as I put in the chat, I think it's a top 10 movie by almost any reasonable metric. Certainly top 10 American movie. It's held up for almost 80 years now. Mm-hmm. If you get in these conversations, you'll hear Citizen Kane, you'll hear Vertigo, you'll hear Casablanca, you'll hear Touch of Evil.
Yep.
I'm sure there's a couple more that you could fill in for me. But I think what makes Casablanca such a great movie, why it still holds up today, is it has the moments that even the most casual movie fan knows of. In fact, they all know "Play It Again, Sam," although that was not the line in the movie.
Right.
But it kind of took on a life of its own over the years. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. We'll always have Paris. But yeah, and where I would respectfully disagree with my young friend Venkman, it has Sidney Greenstreet's character. It's fantastic. Yeah, it was almost the same. It was basically the same character he played in Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
His sidekick Peter Lorre. They attended. If I get the story right, I don't know if he was with him, but when Peter Lorre went to Bela Lugosi's funeral, he said, should we drive a stake in his heart to make sure he's still dead? But those two were great together. And fun fact, Sidney Greenstreet was a stage performer that didn't get into movies until he was almost 60 years old, kind of like Charles Coburn.
Yes.
Who, if you've seen enough old movies, you definitely recognize that name. I mean, what was it? S.K. Sakal, the guy they called Cuddles. He was in this. Paul Heinrich, it was probably the most personality he ever showed in a movie. Ingrid Bergman was fantastic in it. And the thing, basically, you can break down Casablanca in one sentence. It's a selfish man who finally found a cause more important to himself than himself. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking about greatest movies of all time, some initial reactions to like Citizen Kane, a lot of people go, "Oh, it's boring." Yeah, great film, but boring. It's stupid. It's crazy. They're trying to be too artsy fartsy with it. I like the movie a lot. I think it's great. Am I going to watch it 50 million times? No, but rewatchability in and of itself doesn't make a movie great. That has some merit, I imagine. I imagine rewatchability, meaning you can discover something different about a movie the more you watch it, is good. But I'm gonna take this down to even baser level, and this is how I see it. One of the movies I would put in my top 10 movies of all time, I'm not sure what number, would be Rocky from 76 or whatever. And I keep going back to the fact that it's all about the human element when you have a movie like that really transcends it. So I know I'm the one on the Extreme Movie Show that bags the most on these comic book movies and stuff like that. I'm in the kind of the lone spot about that, because it's about people that aren't human, about fighting over something that's not real or whatever. And while it might be entertaining and good and done well and satisfy you as a person going to see a movie, it's hard for me to really elevate that to an art form or something really higher, even though we can appreciate things about it. It's kind of like in a similar way on Kicking It when we cover action films, when we're doing a lot of the martial arts ones. I think we've kind of come up with the idea that we really, really like long shots. We really, really like practical effects as much as possible, the actual people themselves doing the stunts, no matter how good or how bad. And we've talked about, half jokingly, the ninja template in the 80s, Chuck Norris films of the 70s, the whole craze that's gone on, but how movies today, you can't even really watch. It's not even comparable. And for me, Casablanca, when you say that, summing up the idea that Rick himself, played by Humphrey Bogart, is a selfish man, selfishness over the years, especially since the 50s, after the World War and that post-war boom, has gotten a negative connotation. As before, it was basically saying, no, you are supposed to be selfish as an individual and look out for number one. And that became real popular a little bit in self-help stuff in the 60s and 70s, but everyone's looked at it negatively, especially since the 80s. And no matter where you stand politically, culturally, and all that, when I look at Humphrey Bogart in this film, I look at it, he's the man's man. He's the guy that is ultimately in charge of his life. And I think the whole idea of the selfishness, it's not a negative characteristic about him. It's, yes, I am, because of life and the way it is, looking out for myself, but God damn it, this woman comes in that was a major part of my life. I can do some good with the remainder of my life for her. It's going to make me feel good doing about it. And some people might go, well, she's using me for it or not, or what. And that's what makes this movie so interesting, because you're watching it from all these angles that you can appreciate it. And if you do one or two lines of dialogue wrong or your delivery's off, it can give somebody the impression of like, oh, there's no way in hell she's being sincere about how she met this guy or what her cause is and that kind of stuff or whatever. And that adds a little bit of the romance to it, but also the cynicism with it. And whenever I think of somebody like that, I still to this day don't think there's anybody better than Humphrey Bogart playing that kind of character. I'll inhale now while you respond.
I agree. Maybe selfish isn't the right word. I guess more of a man. You can be out for yourself and not be selfish per se. The two aren't mutually exclusive. But the growth of that character in the movie, which you didn't see a whole lot of in those days. You had a guy that was not only, obviously the cause greater than himself was if this goes south, they're all screwed anyway. I mean, so they've got to win this war. But he also knew that she was better Ingrid Bergman was better with Paul Heinrich. So he cared enough about someone else to give her a better chance at a future that she knew they couldn't have together. They could have stretched out a few months or whatever, but he was going to have to go back on the run based on what he had done in the movie. So go ahead.
But it also explained why he became that kind of bitter man, and why, at the end, why it's so important. I think it's the best execution of a flashback I've ever seen, period.
Well, you're young enough where I could jokingly say you've got a lot more flashbacks to watch.
Yeah.
But that being said, you bring up a relevant point, and I will kind of leave somewhat my final thoughts about is this, just with the movie in general, is that when I talk about him being selfish, you're right, it's not mutually exclusive, but you're looking up your own self-interest, which is selfishness is human nature, and she did it, he did it, so to me there's no difference. But here's the thing, and I think this point is often overlooked when discussing this film, if you look at it from the human nature perspective, and guy and girl. They were a couple. They might have had a fling. He obviously was older and she was younger. But back then, say in the 30s to 40s, people married at a younger age. They certainly grew up and were a lot more mature in their adult life at a much younger age than today. It's not even up for debate. The educational system back then was a lot more to the point. So it's not like they were illiterates or dumb people or watered down with a bunch of useless convention that people may argue exists today and have over the decades. So there's a certain practicality of a younger woman marrying an older guy. And so the key word that I'm going for here is legacy. They didn't have a child. And so when they finally meet up and he's older and he's wiser to the ways of the world and all that, I think your point there, Eric, about the fact that he realized she is best with him. We had our moment. I'm letting her know I recognize it, and it's because I do care for her. I'm allowing this to happen, not because she's trying to manipulate me or, I think the other guy's a put or not or what, because that's always, a delicate situation dealing with your ex-lover's current interest or whatever you want to call it. And how do you do that as a man? I mean, it's really hard to do. And so I think the whole legacy thing about not having a kid, in his way, he's leaving his legacy, his imprint on the world, not because he runs a bar and he's Humphrey Bogart and he's the man, but as a character, he's going, the best thing I could probably do in the rest of this crazy world is allow them to go on because she's got a vision. She's always been true to it. So yes, I believe enough in her because I know her, no matter how much I may still want to be with her, how much she may still want to be with me. The fact is we all are adults here. We understand what the score is. And it is something about bigger than all of them, really. And that's where I think it kind of transcends everything. And that's why I mentioned Rocky earlier. It's not about boxing, it's about a relationship. And that's where I think when you watch this movie, you might not understand all the war stuff or some of the nuances of what's going on and being spoken. But I just, every time I rewatch it, it's like rewatching it again for the first time. Some scenes might not have the same impact when you first watch them, like the surprise of him coming out and realizing she's in there, and he just kind of stops, and you're like, damn it, only Bogart can do it that good, And then when he, the ending, everyone always wants to talk about the ending. Well, there's a dead body, and he's trying to have some sort of relationship with the police guy or whatever, and you're like, well, I don't know what his end's going to be, but at least he feels fulfilled now. That's the romance about it, and it to me, it's about legacy. So overall, again, I think it's easily in the top 10, even still to this day in 2020. I think it's a great film. And one of the reasons we were just bringing it up tonight is planting the seeds, because you're going to get a chance later in the week to hear RDB's and Professor Pixel's first reactions on watching, which I think is pretty interesting. So we wanted to hype it a little bit.
Yeah. Claude Rains is great in this movie.
Well, the important takeaway, remember, is the problem of two people don't amount to a hill of beans. Remember,
or as I say, Police Squad, but this is our hill, and these are our beans.
If we do have a few more minutes, I do want to touch on something that you were mentioning, Rob, before I jumped on, was Bogart's popularity to this day. Was it enhanced by his early death? I guess a question you could also pose about Clark Gable and Gary Cooper. But when I think about the classic movies, the all-time classics, when you make that short list of, say, 25, 30, maybe even 50 movies, you're going to find when you finished it, Bogart's going to be the star in the most number of those movies, whether it's African Queen, Key Largo, Casablanca, Maltese Falcon. I mean, he was a giant star, and I think if you are any kind of movie aficionado throughout the ages, find me a bigger star to this day than Humphrey Bogart.
Can't. I mean, as much as I love Tom Cruise's movies, he's not as great as an actor as Humphrey Bogart is. I'm
not even talking about whether or not he's the greatest actor, because Bogart wasn't the greatest actor of all time. Hell, that might have been Paul Muni, who no one remembers. But I
like Heston a lot, but when I think of Heston, I don't think of romances. Or
like I said, Bogart had that distinct voice, in the way he carried himself.
And he made the transition from heel to face better than Roddy Piper, because his movies in the 30s, if you watch those, he is the heavy in almost everyone until. It was a 1937 movie he made with Bette Davis. I wish I could remember the title. I could look it up, but
is that Petrified Forest? Somewhere around that time.
Don't think it was Petrified Forest, but if anybody's clacking away in the computer,
was it Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte?
No, that was 1964. he was a bit dead at the time and wasn't in it.
Dark Victory.
Dark Victory. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I said Bogart, he was, for a man of small stature, he cast a giant shadow in the movie.
Key Largo, you can see how short he is, but still, it's like he just had that personality. Just had like that voice. He would have been a great Dick Tracy.
That's a good point, actually. But one of the things I said this movie benefited from was a stellar supporting cast. Claude Rains might have been the best character actor, who also actually did get some leading man roles. I think he was Bette Davis called him her favorite co-star. He was good, and someone described his voice as gravel mixed with honey.
Well, we all know everybody smoked like crazy back then. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is a fun fact that I learned last night. Claude Rains was a non-smoker, so he, during the movie, every time he was seen smoking, what he would do is he would put the smoke in his mouth, pull the cigarette away, and wait a minute and just blow the smoke out. That way it wasn't.
So he didn't inhale.
Yeah,
interesting.
He's I smoked, but I never inhaled.
Well, it just goes to show that when you have a film like this, sometimes things get legs of their own. And we all know that when somebody dies right now, of course, we like to reminisce about certain people that die that we discussed or whatever. We didn't obviously talk too much about Eddie Van Halen being a musician, because we generally tend to limit what we do here on the Extreme Movie Show to movies, although we delve into TV a little bit because it's media. So I think what we're talking about here is just the net impact somebody has. And you could talk about how the Beatles were a very small group that technically really weren't around for a long period of time, all things considered, but they had a huge impact and everything. And it's not necessarily about the amount of record sales perhaps or whatever, but there's just the icons of yesterday that are mostly gone to this day, and only a few are left, or few and far between. And sometimes I think we can fall in the trap of over idolizing somebody just because the rest of the crop around them kind of sucks. And I think the overall decay that I've joked about since about 1984 or 85 in films in general allows a lot of garbage to be produced today that we can't just go, wow, this person really stands out. And you know what? You don't fault anybody for making movies, and we can talk. Gen X plays a part into it too, but there's something just a bit more important that it's just your personality. And when Bogart comes on that screen, you want to watch the damn movie, and you don't give a damn what the hell's going on about it. So lesser technically skilled actors that people might talk about. Mel Gibson is certainly one compared to Anthony Hopkins, let's say, or others. Yeah, this guy might be more skilled, but you want to really watch the other guy. So, rarely do you get somebody that just, I think, has been able to stay around for so long, like Humphrey Bogart and all his films, that you go, I don't care who's in it. I don't really care what it's about. Okay, some hurricanes coming. There's some bad dudes. He's in his hotel room. Sounds kind of dumb and boring, but actually it's not. It's kind of intriguing. That's kind of what went through my head as a kid when I started watching these older films, thanks to my parents who were a little older when they had me, and still, liked some of these old films, and so we would be allowed to watch them in our household back at that time. So that made a big impact on me because it's lasted to this day. So
Yeah.
Go ahead for your final thoughts.
I'm looking at some of the quotes from Bogart over the years of his pro-person quotes. He's one. I hate funerals. They aren't for the guy who's dead. If the guys are left alive, enjoy mourning.
Yeah, he's true libertarian in the sense of how he lived his life.
Yeah, and then he talks about John Wayne's and Gary Cooper. He's like, I don't approve of John Wayne's and the Gary Cooper saying, shucks, I ain't no actor. I'm just a bridge builder or a gas station attendant. He's like, if they aren't actors, what the hell are they getting paid for? I have respect for my profession. I worked hard at it.
And the transition from stage to film was not easy for a lot of people. Pixel, final thoughts?
I'm just going to say that if you have the time this Friday, then please do check that video out, because, like I said, I'm going to be during it. I was saying more facts, and you can just see how much we enjoyed it. And I am sitting here 2 days later, and I'm still feeling nostalgic about it.
Yeah, and for First Reaction Fridays, that's one of the things about it is I kind of have a love-hate affair with some of these things, because I'd rather talk about how we think and feel about a movie and relate it to things, especially when we get comments and retweets and those kinds of social media things, especially with the younger audience today. But it's interesting too that here you are, two guys that are definitely younger, and you're watching something that to me I'm like, well, yeah, it's a great movie, but I'm curious what younger people today would be thinking about it. So I'm glad you guys like it and you guys are watching it too. Eric, any final thoughts about Casablanca or Bogart or anything in general?
I was going to say one thing about Bogart that you notice over the course of his career is he made the people around him better. I've seen other movies with Paul Heinrich, and he kind of reminded me of sort of like in the same vein as a Franchot Tone, that they're good actors, but they don't stand out. But you put him in a movie with Bogart playing opposite him, and it brought out the best in his personality. So his character is more memorable than it might be in the next movie that he might have been top billing in. And whereas in another movie, like say Key Largo, Bogart. Another thing, Bogart in the movies we talk about that are all-time classics, you would have him and a couple of other people who are highly regarded to this day. Like in Key Largo is Lionel Barrymore and Edward G. Robinson.
Yes.
You couldn't ask for two greater performers to be in a movie with. and then all the other side people, all the hoods in the hotel, just were on their game, just as they were, the other characters in Casablanca. In that movie, I would say, Claude Rains and Sidney Greenstreet, come right to mind as far as being these two stellar performers. But Bogart, he didn't need to make those two better, but everybody else around him, and that's what he had a tendency to do. Just if for nothing else, his screen presence alone just rubbed off on the people around him.
Yeah, and then I'm reading some more quotes about trivia about him. It says basically Jekyll Warner originally turned him down because he ejected to Bogart's list.
Yeah, and that's why he was a heavy, because he had that. And I don't know if he had like a cleft palate or something, but your looks determine whether you're the pretty boy or you're the face or the heel. Yep. I mean, it's a big part of it.
The National Film Registry, also by the Library of Congress, actually has being he has seven different films. They're basically they put them in there because they're culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. He's got The Maltese Falcon from 1941, Casablanca from 42, The Big Sleep from 1946. Treasure Sierra Nevada, 1948, In a Lonely Place, 1950, African Queen, 1951, and Sabrina, 1954. So, I mean, like, this guy is like, he's a great actor, great films. It's sad he would have been in The Man Who Would Be King, but he died. Him and Clark Gable.
And that movie doesn't mention the Kane or that list. The Kane Mutiny not on. Key Largo didn't make that list.
Yeah,
I mean, it's. I said he's.
Well, Key Largo got an Oscar, didn't it?
That I do not know, but I mean,
his nominees: Dead End, Dark Victory, Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, Treasure Sierra Nevada, and the Kane Mutiny. With Casablanca being the only winner for Oscar.
And if you have any of those movies that you mentioned, if you haven't seen them, guys,
they're on the list.
Check them out.
That's why we go through them. They are that good. Well, the other thing too is, and I'll kind of close on this, kind of toning it down a little bit and kind of seemingly taking this out of left field from one of the comments that was made earlier. I'm a big basketball fan, big basketball guy. If I were to pick out of history one person to start a team with, it would be Wilt Chamberlain. To me, there's no doubt in my mind he is far ahead of number one than anybody else that would be a close number two. I know today's world, everybody wants to talk about LeBron James. He's probably not even my top 20 or 25. People will talk about Michael Jordan. He would be up there much, much higher than like Kobe Bryant and stuff. So the point I'm trying to get to here is a comment that was made. I think a close number two for me between Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. I think I'd almost have to go with Larry Bird for the simple reason that I was the biggest Laker fan growing up in the 80s during the best decade of basketball of all time. There's no contest about it, no matter what anybody young try to do it. And yes, I'm trolling a bit here. But the thing about Larry Bird is I hated the bastard because he did the one thing that was mentioned earlier by you, Eric, and that is he elevated people around him. First thing I thought about when you mentioned Humphrey Bogart, I thought, well, yeah, he's like a point guard. The old school point guard thing was to, get people the ball in the right place at the right position so they could be effective doing it. And no matter what you think about today, the game's been watered down as far as basketball is concerned. So you don't see a lot of these defined roles. That is an excellent way of describing how Humphrey Bogart is. When you can make other people around you better, that elevates your own star too, because to your point, I don't think technically speaking he was the best looking guy or the best technically skilled actor, but he had a presence. He was comfortable in it. He knew what worked, and that was able to translate well. And he then all of a sudden, half grain and puff his chest out like a wannabe guy preening for the hot woman. He was like, I'm Humphrey Bogart. It's not, I'm Humphrey Bogart. I'm the man. I'm alpha. No, he was Humphrey Bogart. That's just who he was. And that's just how people responded to him on screen. And I think when you ever read about his personal life and how he lived it, and of course his romance with Lauren Bacall, I mean, it's not like he was a stranger to the persona that he played on screen. And that's what makes him so awesome. I mean, all those movies you read RDV about being nominated for different things. It's true. And we don't have a set schedule for when we do like our science fiction films or our extreme classics, but we definitely said, well, Bogart's the one we got to start with. And this one is definitely one of the best.
He's got two funny quotes, I thought. One, he's in acting, he's like sex. You either do it and don't talk about it, or you talk about it and don't do it. That's why I'm always suspicious of people who talk too much about either. But his last words are the funniest, though. His last words he said before he died: "I should have never switched from scotch to martinis."
It all went downhill from there. Had nothing to do with the cancer sticks.
Exactly.
Smoke them if you got them.
He's like, he also says, "I made more lousy pictures than any actor in history."
You know what? And sometimes they're their own worst critics because they know what's going on. And you never know. It's like music. You might make a song you think kind of sucks, but you never know if it's going to be a hit. And in today's world, of course, nothing's really original or made anymore by artists. There's hardly any artists anymore. So you have no quality. But with Humphrey Bogart back then, yes, it was the old picture system where they just crank them out. They loan people off to this and that. There's nothing wrong with that. What's going to happen is I think inadvertently you're going to have a few gems, but now all these superstars take 2-3 years to make a movie, and all they want to do is get thrown into a tentpole franchise to cash in. So they don't really have too much work to do except stand in front of a green screen, and that's it. So which movie would I rather see? Some more summer stuff or Casablanca? Casablanca, hands down.
He's got a quote on Ingrid Bergman. When he was making Casablanca, he says, "I didn't do anything I'd never done before. But when the camera moves on that Bergman face and she's saying she loves you, it would make anybody feel romantic."
It's like the late, well, not so late, but the great actor who's getting up there in age of perhaps my generation, maybe not quite yours, RDV, although I know for a fact you're a fan. JCVD, who talked about having an affair while he was on a set of Street Fighter, going, "She's such a beautiful woman, and we're in Thailand and Vietnam or wherever, and how could you blame me for making love to such a sweet woman?"
One other thing, I guess it took disaster movies in the early '70s to bring two giant stars together, like McQueen and Newman and Towering Inferno and so on. Humphrey Bogart and Spencer Tracy made one movie together in 1930, and I can't even remember the title. They were in prison, but I would have liked to have seen Bogart do a movie with Gable or Grant or John Wayne. I mean, there's a lot. I would like to see more movies that paired up two people who have kind of remained giants in the industry to this day.
Right. 1930 was that there's Broadways Like That and Up the River with Steve Jordan. Devil with the Women?
No, I want to say it had a number in the title, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up.
Two Against the World?
No, it's not that. It was 1930, and I said if you just look up whatever movies Bogart made in 30 and cross-reference it with Spencer Tracy, one of them's going to match.
Let me look at.
And that's another guy that an all-time great who's probably the most forgotten of the bunch.
Yeah, that is Up the River.
Okay. Because if you're not of a certain age, you don't remember Spencer Tracy. And that's a shame.
Well, it was a pleasure, guys, going for almost an hour talking about Casablanca, one of the greatest movies of all time, in my opinion, and frankly, that's why we talked about it. So,
my final thoughts.
Fridays, yeah.
My final thoughts for a guy who smoked 40 cigarettes a day, he had a nice voice.
Yeah, and the women loved him.
Yeah.
And he had one of the best posters of all time, too, of the non-female variety, I guess, Yeah.
So
iconic. All right, guys, I'd like to thank RDV, Professor Pixel, and, of course, Eric Green for hopping in, too, covering Casablanca. Great, great film. If you haven't seen it, go see it. If you have seen it, if you see it again, let us know what you think about it or something. It's stuff like this that comes up every now and then. It makes us go, yeah, this is why we made this channel, to talk about just sheer greatness in some films, too. And don't forget Miami Connection with YK Kim that we did recently and other stuff, too, here on the Extreme Movie Show. So for all of us, thank you for listening. This Friday.
Yep.
First Reaction Friday. Watch for it. It's going to drop. All right. Good night, guys. Take care and stay extreme.
Good night, kids.
So long.